Jason Clare, I spoke to him a short time ago. He's the Shadow Communications spokesperson, often touted as a future Labor leader. That's been following him for a while. He's, of course, in Paul Keating's old seat of Blaxland, so he's done well to even hold that seat at the last election, the way things were looking for Labor in the lead up to it. The transfer to Kevin Rudd no doubt helped him, but I was talking to him about portfolio responsibilities in the area of communications, speaking to him about some of these suggestions of ABC cuts. Is the ABC too fat as an organisation? Is there cuts that can be made? And also the concept of cross-media ownership. There's a lot of discussion that the government will bring change laws perhaps in that space. I wanted to know what Labor's positions were. I spoke to him a short time ago. Jason Clare, thanks very much for your company. Malcolm Turnbull has all but admitted that there are cuts to the ABC, but he does say that they're cuts that will be back of house rather than affecting programming. Do you accept that?
No, I don't. I'm glad he's admitted there's cuts. He couldn't keep that charade going for much longer. There were cuts in the budget and there's more cuts to come. What they constitute's a broken promise. That's the first point that is important to make here. The night before the election, Tony Abbott said there'd be no cuts to the ABC. Well, there were cuts in the budget. There's more cuts coming soon, and it'll be about $500 million worth of cuts. Malcolm Turnbull's argument that this is just back of house is falling apart as well, because we've had the head of the ABC say that you can't just cut back of house without having an impact on programming, and I suspect we'll see that when these cuts come, that we'll see hundreds of people get the sack of the ABC and lots of programs hit the cutting room floor as well.
Do you accept, though, that perhaps the ABC has gone beyond its remit? The 24-hour news channel, that may be a good thing. Obviously, I'm speaking as someone who's sitting here now on a 24-hour news channel, but I'm more interested in, and I guess I'm conflicted here too because I write for a newspaper, I'm more interested in the virtual newspaper that they have online. Is this really the sort of resource allotment that should be happening with the national broadcaster?
I strongly think that's the approach that they need to take. That's where all news is going. Online, whether it's a website where you can read what the news, what's happening on the news, or whether it's something like iView. This is where commercial broadcasters are going as well. If ABC doesn't go there, then it just won't keep pace with what people want to see and what people want to read.
And I guess where that then takes us, we'll come back to the ABC in a moment, but that sort of extends the debate into this whole issue of whether cross-media ownership laws need to change or not. We are living in a multi-platform, multimedia age. The argument increasingly coming from the big media players, the latest being Seven, of course, is that those laws are archaic and they need to be scrapped. I know you'll wait to see what the government comes up with, but is Labor on board with the principle of making adjustments to these cross-media laws given the modern age we're in?
Well, we've got an open mind. We do need to see the whole package. What Seven has said is what I've said, is that you can't just look at media ownership laws in isolation. We also need to see what the government has planned in terms of broadcasting sport, whether some of that will move from free-to-air to programming on Foxtel. We also need to see what they're doing on fees as well. But I'd make the general point that whilst the internet has changed things, it hasn't transformed the media in the ways that Malcolm Turnbull would suggest. And the best way to illustrate that is the fact that the top 5 news websites are all owned by traditional media companies, by News, by Fairfax and by the ABC. And so people are still getting their news information online from the traditional media outlets. And if, like me, you think that diversity of media ownership is important, then you do need to factor that into any decisions you make.
Just going back to the ABC and the cuts, I mean, the Minister has admitted that they're cuts. That leads me to accept your comment that it's a broken election promise. That said, however, the ABC does have fat that can be shed. I wouldn't be surprised sitting there in our city studio at Sky News if you had to set yourself up. We're a much leaner operation. I wonder whether you think that there is an expectation that the national broadcaster also becomes a leaner operation like a commercial operator like Sky News, or do you see it as more understandable or acceptable that a broadcaster that is the national broadcaster perhaps has a few more bells and whistles than we do here at Sky News?
Well, any organisation can be more efficient. The ABC's no exception. Same with SBS. My argument has been that for Tony Abbott to keep his promise, he needs to make sure that where he finds efficiencies, he should reinvest that money in the ABC to do the sorts of things Labor did, create things like ABC3 or iView. To your broader point, yeah, I think there is a bigger role for the ABC, and the best evidence of that are the foreign correspondents that it places around the world in places like Indonesia or Japan, New Zealand, China, the United States, to make sure that Australia understands what's happening in other parts of the world. And Sky can't always do that, or it does it in different ways through the contracts that it has with international media organisations.
Do you worry, though, that a national broadcaster can crowd out the market? I mean, you want at one level, it's a catch-22, isn't it? At one level, you want in a challenged media commercial environment, you want a national broadcaster that ensures certain levels of quality media and investigative reporting. But by the same token, the stronger and the bigger they are, they have a distorting effect on the market as well. It really is a bit of a catch-22.
Well, you know, that would be a legitimate argument if you think they are crowding it out. I just don't think they are. You know, the reverse is often true. I was up the Central Coast and in Newcastle in New South Wales today, and in many parts of Australia, the only place that you can get the news on the radio is through ABC Regional Radio, which provides an essential service, a service that often no one else provides. We're coming into bushfire season, and it reminds us all about the important work ABC does in those circumstances. I would hate to see cuts that are now being contemplated and soon to be announced having an impact on regional radio services, for example.
I'm sure the National Party will keep a close eye on that one. Just finally, Jason Clare, before we run out of time, I wanted to ask you about what your potential expectations are, I suppose, around the free trade agreement with China. It looks like it's going to be signed early next week. It's all but finalised, apparently. Labor, of course, was heavily involved in this over the years before now, so as a senior minister in that government, you would have had some awareness in that area yourself. Are there concerns, or are there potential areas that have been looked at here that impact on the communications portfolio? I'm particularly thinking about some of the issues around China as a non-democracy in that space of service provision around the NBN. Have you got any wind of concerns there?
No, well, I haven't been told of any areas that might be of concern. Certainly there was the prospect about 12 months ago of Huawei being allowed to provide infrastructure as part of the NBN. There was a split in the government. Malcolm Turnbull and Julie Bishop wanted to include them in the NBN. George Brandis and Tony Abbott said no. Malcolm Turnbull was rolled. I think it was the right decision that the government made. More generally on the free trade agreement, I'd say this: we've been reflecting on the work of Gough Whitlam. He helped to build that formal relationship with China. Back 40 years ago, two-way trade between Australia and China was less than $100 million a year. Now it's worth more than $100 billion a year. And a free trade agreement will help to build on that. We need to see the details of it, but these sorts of agreements are key to Australia's future.
Jason Clare, appreciate your time. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Peter.